The value of the LIC DSF as an early warning tool for debt distress depends on the quality of underlying projections. This realism tool asks what factors contributed to unexpected increases in debt to GDP ratio in the past, and what is assumed about these factors' contribution to debt in the future. The figure shows an example of the presentation of this tool in the LIC DSF. You can find this figure in the worksheet called Output 4.1 Forecast Error. The left panel in the figure displays the debt-creating flows that account for the change in debt both in the last 5 years, shown in the figure as historical change, and in the first 5 years of projection, shown in the figure as projected change. 5 public debt-creating flows are presented in the figure. These are the primary fiscal deficit, real GDP growth, the real exchange rate depreciation, other debt-creating flows, and the residual. When there are significant discrepancies between the past and the projected debt-creating flows, these discrepancies should be understood and justified. In this example for country X, we observe 4 large differences between the historical pattern of debt accumulation and projections for debt. First, the projected contribution of primary deficits is smaller than its historical contributions to debt. In the past 5 years, primary deficit was the largest contributor to raising debt. However, projected fiscal position will help reduce debt in the coming 5 years. This difference could be due to either some one-off negative shocks in the past that have now abated, or a substantial planned fiscal adjustment incorporated in the projections. Second, real exchange rate depreciation had made a large contribution to debt accumulation in the past. However, there is a negligible projected change in the real exchange rate. Such a different contribution in the future can be justified if the equilibrium real exchange rate gap has already closed. Third, the projected contribution of real GDP growth to limiting debt accumulation is larger than the historical contribution. In other words, projected real GDP growth is higher than the past growth. Lastly, a large part of past debt accumulation was determined by a residual, suggesting unidentified debt-creating factors were at play. It is important to understand this residual and whether same factors may continue to be relevant in the future and thus should be added into the debt projections. Let's now turn to forecast errors in the past debt projections. As you can see in the right panel of the figure, the LIC DSF decomposes the forecast errors in debt accumulation over the past 5 years and compare these errors with the forecast errors in other low-income countries. This figure presents 2 key points. First, it shows which factors have contributed the most to unexpected changes in debt. In this example, the primary fiscal deficit, the real exchange rate depreciation, and the residual contributed the most to debt forecast errors. These factors thus deserve a careful examination for the projection period. Second, this figure shows how debt forecast errors for country X are compared to its peer group of other low-income countries. In this case, the forecast error for country X, as shown by the diamond, is a clear outlier because it is well above the distribution of forecast error in other low-income countries.